In the last section, we put together a little bit of test scaffolding for getting an exercise put together for reading users out of our database. To make sure that we actually had a user inside of our database to work with, we created a new user called Joe and then saved them to our users collection. So now we want to find a list of all of the users in our database with the name of Joe. That's our goal right now. In order to query our database in any fashion, we are going to make use of what's called a class method or a class function. Let's take a look at a diagram that's going to help us figure out how this works. There's two query methods that we're going to be making great use of with the Mongoose library. The first is find, and the second is find one. The most important thing to understand here is that these find and find one functions are tied to our class of user in both cases. So because we created a user model, we got access to user.find and user.find1. If we had made another model called something like blog post, we would have blogpost.find and blogpost.find1. So each model class has its own find and find1 functions. The find and find1 functions both work by passing them an object with some criteria. This criteria right here is basically the properties that we want to search for. So in our case, because we want to find a user with the name of Joe, we might pass in an object with a key of name and a value of the string Joe. The criteria for find and find1 works identically. The big difference between them is what gets returned to us and how that return value works. We use find whenever we want to find all of the users that match this given criteria. So maybe I have many different users with the name of Joe and I want to find every single one of them. That would be a good use case for using the find method because that's going to find every user in my collection with the name of Joe. On the other hand is the find one function. Find one will search through our database or our collection with a given criteria, and as soon as it finds a record with a given criteria, it will automatically stop the query and return that single record just by itself. So the big difference between these, find finds a big collection or a big pile of records, whereas find one is all about finding a very specific record. The last thing to be aware of is that find, since it returns a list of different users, returns an array, whereas find one returns a singular record. So let's write a test, or kind of flesh out the test we've got written so far by using user.find and try to find all the users with the name of Joe. Now, of course, right now we've only got one user inside of here, but we'll write our test in such a way that, hey, we'll just assume that there's always going to be the singular user. So first, we will call user.find1. Again, take special note here that we are referencing the user model, like the user class, not a specific user. All of the query methods that we're going to find whenever we're working like looking at our existing collection is going to be using the user class as opposed to using or making reference to an instance of a user, like what we did when we wanted to insert a new one. So then we will call find one with an object that will provide our search criteria. And sorry, I said find one, really meant to say find, totally my mistake here. We're trying to find all users with the name of Joe, so we should be using find, not find one. Totally my mistake. So we're going to pass this thing the criteria that we want to search with. So we're going to pass an object, and we want to say, find me every user who has a name of Joe. Now again, just like everything else that we've seen with Mongoose and everything that we will see coming in the future, this operation right here takes some amount of time to execute. So we don't just magically instantly get back a list of users. Instead, we have to chain on a .then and pass in a callback function. So the interior of this function right here will be called, with a list of all the users who were found. So I'm going to add in users, and this is going to be my list of users, however many were found. There might be 0, it might be empty array, there might be 10 users inside of here. For our test, we're really going to expect there to just be a single user, our user Joe. So if we're going any farther, let's just console log this thing. Let's just console log it and see what we have to work with. Also, don't forget that because this is an asynchronous test, and it is asynchronous because it's going to take some amount of time to complete, we have to make sure that we include our done callback. So I'm going to reference done for the it block, and then inside of here, we will call done to tell Mocha, hey, this test is going to take a bit of time. Once we call done, you can go on to the next test. So let's run this. Let's say npm run test. And inside of here, we get a console log. It looks like, yep, it's an array. And we've got an object that represents our user coming out of the database. So let's take a quick break and then come back and figure out how we will write an assertion to say that, yep, our user was found successfully. So I'll see you in just a second.